Okay.
Says you're being live streamed, Bert.
It looks
Yeah.
like it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, welcome Facebook. 1 second and we will be up and with you. All right. Hey everybody. Expecting Jean, expecting Patricia.
I see
Not sure
Gene.
about, not sure about others. Yeah, here comes Gina. Picture looks okay. It would look a whole lot better with Patricia in it, wouldn't it? But I do have my Seminette square off on to remind you of her until she gets here. Yeah, we're going to talk about introverts saving the church tonight. This article I read that I can't remember exactly how it got to me, but holy cow, I didn't expect to like it, but I do read a lot of things that are sent to me, and it got me thinking. I started kind of looking at who are the extroverts and who are the introverts in Owl Rock. You know, I started kind of standing in the pulpit, imagining myself standing there and looking around at everybody. And I could only think of one, which is weird. Wonder how many extroverts or introverts might be in your church or the churches that you've served, or maybe the church down the street. And it made me wonder, is the direction that worship is taken, worship designed by extroverts for extroverts, in a lot of settings. And yeah, I want to talk about that.
I like it.
Yeah, you out there, Gino? I see your picture and your what do you call it? What's that thing called? Is that your icon or your
Avatar?
Avatar?
Avatar.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to show myself because I'm introverted.
Well, the truth comes out.
Right.
Well, all things are possible for him who has faith. You can change. You don't have to be shy and awkward all your life, Gino.
Hey, yo.
By the way, shy and awkward is not the definition of introvert. By any measure that I've read, including psychological diagnostic manuals and such. So, well, here we are, ladies and gentlemen. There's Sheila.
There's Sheila.
And there's Kathy. All right. Okay, y'all. You may have had a chance to read the article. And the question that intrigued me, and then there was much more substance to that article than I realized at first. Patricia is here. But it proposed the question, can introverts save the church from itself? Is worship, especially in evangelical circles or in contemporary worship circles, is it extroverts designing worship for extroverts? And how do introverts fit into that? And which are you? And I had just said a minute ago, Patricia, you may be, I'm guessing you might be the only extrovert at Owl Rock. I can't think of another one. But I mean, off the top of my head. So let me turn it over to the panel. Panel, here is the Reverend Dr. Patricia Seminette Gary.
Yay,
Everybody.
Patricia.
Yay. Hi.
And even though I'm not wearing my hat right now, it doesn't look too bad. I probably should get my hat, shouldn't I? Did you have a chance to look at the article? Maybe you can talk about it for a minute, or maybe one of them can talk about it while I run and get my hat.
Sure.
Okay, go.
Who wants to go first?
You.
You.
I second that motion.
Why me?
You are the extrovert.
I don't understand what my extroversion has to do with worship.
Well, Well, Bert prefaced a lot of that by saying that extrovert worship was designed by extrovert people for extrovert people.
Yeah, no, I'm just being funny, but yeah. So I read the article and I was intrigued by what the writer was saying about it, and it seemed as if it was designed by extroverted people or for extrovert or the discomfort. I never see it. I never saw it as worship being uncomfortable for introverts. I can see how someone might arrive at that for persons who don't want to be out front or involved, or who worships probably very charismatically, you know, hands raised, lifted, waving, shouting, like in a lot of our churches. Like I grew up in our church, and I think, so I know we have introverts and extroverts in my home church, and we all do the same thing in terms of worship. My sister led the praise and worship for years, and she's one of the biggest introverts that I know. So look at you. Cowboy.
Couldn't find my other one.
It's okay. You look cute.
Oh, thank you.
So yeah, so I'm trying to put together the introversion with charismatic worship. Because I'm thinking of Renee, who is an introvert, who's led worship for years, lifting hands. I mean, she grew up in our church, but then she was ordained in the Assemblies of God. And she's been there doing, you know, worship and all that for years. And I'm wondering if she or others might feel forced into this role to be, you know, to do more charismatic worship. And I see it as something that, not feeling forced, but something.
Expected pressure to, well, it's like that guy was saying, especially early on in the article, he always felt less than. He felt like that he had to be more on fire for Jesus there, because he almost felt like he had to act, because that's what was expected of him. And if they expected that of him, that meant God expected that of him. And so he always felt less than. He felt a little bit phony for doing it, and he's suspicious that they were acting. All of those things came to a head for me. I mean, I was like, I remember that a little bit.
So while that might be true for some churches or some ministers, I wonder if it's less about the introversion, extroversion piece. Because I think a lot of churches pressure people to do things that they don't want to do. I think from preaching, people are pressured to, you know, come to the altar. People are pressured to worship. People are pressured, stand to your feet. Everybody stand and raise your hands. And, you know, so I think people are pressured, but I think a lot of it comes from because they feel that's what God is expecting. I think you're right, that people are expecting God is expecting that of them. And so they put the pressure on the rest of us. So, but I think, I don't know, but I can understand how an introvert might feel about that. But I don't know if it's designed or was intended to pick out the introvert, so to speak, if that makes sense.
It does. Some other people are trying to get in here. I've got a million thoughts, but I'm gonna hold them if I can. I heard Mike try to chime in a minute ago.
Please go for it.
Somebody
Mike.
say something.
Yeah, I think that it can feel like once you go through the thought processes you were just talking about, you can start thinking like, okay, God does expect me to be something other than what I am. And that's very different from the way I see Jesus as kind of meeting people right where they are and who they are and what they're about, and knowing how to speak to that. And And so I like, that Jesus can turn it back around, but that it does begin to feel like, okay, God expects me to be something other than what I feel like I am.
The contemporary worship style or evangelical worship plan or model pretty much evolved in our lifetimes. Is that
Yeah, I think so.
yeah, I mean,
Seems
when I was
like it.
younger, I don't remember any churches having the kind of worships that you typically see today. Like, just imagine Joel Osteen model, where you have long praise music at the beginning with a lot of emotion and standing and singing, no bulletin. The words to whatever we sing together, if we sing together, are on big computer screens, and the service is designed down to the millisecond, as this writer said, to minimalize, maybe even to eliminate dead air.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one person's dead air is another person's creative silence, reflection, and thoughtfulness.
Right.
So if you designed out thoughtfulness and reflection and silence, what have you done to the service? Well, one thing you've done is you've made it less boring for extroverts.
Mm-hmm.
They get bored easily. They want things to move along. It's like that white comedian who married a black girl, and they went to black church, and he was like, "When's it gonna be over? It lasts forever. Black church lasts forever." And here's an extroverted guy who just wants to get to Denny's for breakfast. That's all he wants. I thought we were going to be here an hour. The sun just set. We've been here 6 hours, and then he started complaining about we've got dancers, and then we've got the praise group, and then we've got the deaf group, and then we've got all these groups going, and they're all synchronized, and they're all moving fast, and I thought, why?
I think too, a lot of this has to do with interpretation. The same way we have all these denominations and faith traditions, people interpret the scriptures differently. The Psalms talk a lot about praise and worship, praise, bless the Lord. And so people interpret that as, if you're going to praise, it has to be where you're standing. It has to do with lifting hands. It has to do with loud, we talk about all the Hebrew words for praise and all of that. So I think it has a lot to do with interpretation, but there are some churches here who just do hymn singing. Some churches don't believe in any organs or instruments.
That's true.
And they worship. So I think it comes down to interpretation.
So I hear, okay. I think the Bible interpretation of scripture has, I guess I agree. I think that what happened, I don't know that it's biblical. I think what happened was the church saw that it worked to try to get people to come back to church to make it less boring. And one way to make it less boring is to make it less reflective, less thoughtful, kill all the silence, program it every millisecond, and make sure that no one's thoughts stray. One thing after another, just keep stimulating. And God forbid in a church, if you have a pastor who really is strict about how he wants that service to go or how she wants that service to go, and if you mess up, you're going to get a tongue lashing, or if you get fired because for 3 seconds there was a delay before that song came on. You made people sit there for 3 seconds. They might have had a reflection. Do you realize what that means? Every extrovert in the building would leave.
Well, it's just like
It's like
when people try to have a conversation. If you're talking with somebody one-on-one and they stop and they don't say anything, it makes most people really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because, but the correct thing to do is wait until they do speak. You ask them a question, then they clam up. It's because they're thinking, but most people feel pressured to just spit out an answer right away instead of giving it thought.
Yeah.
And it's much the same way, I think.
I hear you for sure. I like that. The whole thing's got me thinking. Who else? I can't wait to hear what Gino has to say on this. Here he comes. You got something to say, Gino?
I think a lot of it speaks to expectations, intentionality, and authenticity.
Mhm.
So many times it just feels like folks are trying to be what they ain't. You had an experience as a youth trying to be pushed, bullied, and manipulated into a particular response. I've experienced that in a variety of worship settings. At a base chapel service in Germany that was supposed to be Protestant, that was contemporary. Our faith was questioned. Y'all aren't singing this song, but you must not love Jesus very much. It's like, well, I can't follow you because y'all are terrible musicians. None of you is on key, and I don't know the song.
Gene, why don't you just be more honest and forthright in the things that you say?
It's one of the only times I've ever walked out of a worship service.
Whoa.
And I went to annual conference, and we had a person that was going to lead singing. Now, Patricia, I've heard you lead singing in the church. It's a spiritual teamwork, right? But this person was doing a lot of vocalization and stuff, and then chastised the congregation for not singing along with them.
Mm.
I sat down and endured the rest of the service. But it's like, what do you expect from me?
Right.
You're showing off. I'm not going to.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that grabbed me, was that this guy had the nerve, this author of this article had the nerve to say that, you know what, to reflective introverts, if the truth be told, some of this hoopla in worship designed to make it more comfortable for the extroverts looks fake. Some of it looks fake.
Yep.
It looks like that white guy, the comedian. He said, why are we staying here so long? She's caught the Spirit 4 times. You can't catch the Spirit 4 times in 3 days. It ain't possible. And all he wanted to do was get to breakfast.
He's not God.
He was trying to get
Who's counting?
you don't catch the Spirit 4 times in one service.
Yes, you can.
Well, somebody did, he said. I wouldn't know, and I don't even know what catch the Spirit means. But anyway, so I've heard people who've joined Owl Rock over the last 13 years say to me 2 different things. They say, I was looking for a loving small church, and I was looking for traditional worship. And we all a loving small church, and we by and large do traditional music, traditional worship. But this article made me think if there was something more or additional under that, and that is that there's a minority of people right now who are tired of loud, over-programmed worship, and what they're looking for is a place where they can feel comfortable in silence, have an opportunity to reflect on their lives, and have the chance to meditate or contemplate what the pastor or someone else is saying, making space for introverts to process, because they learn by reflecting on their experiences, and they know that what they get closest to it in those moments of pause, where you press the pause button. Well, there's no pause button in Houston at the Joel Osteen rally, and that's what it is. I mean, they've turned worship into a pep rally, in my humble opinion. I don't judge those people, but I do wonder what we are doing. What are we accomplishing? I know we get more money and we get more attendance when you ramp it up, and you've got Liberace on the piano, and you got Sandy Patty singing, and you rev it up, you turn it into entertainment. But when you do that, what do you lose? And the other way around, how come the introverts are jealous of the extroverts and want to be more like them? Why isn't it the other way around? Isn't this the whole Christ thing about Christian reflection and action? Well, you can't reflect if there's not a pause to reflect.
I think we can have a combination of both. So for me personally, And I don't think it has to do with my extroversion. Sometimes I want more than a hymn. There are times when I want a nice, good old gospel song. I want to clap my hands. I want to raise my
I
hands.
saw you do it.
And yeah, there are
Down
times
in the
when
Bahamas.
I long for that.
Mhm.
I don't think that has anything to do with extroversion. That has to do with me personally and my preference. Like some people
okay.
like, a choir. I love choir
I know,
singing. I've
Trish.
conducted choirs for all my life. So I love that kind of worship and singing. I love hymns too. I love hymns. And I would love to have a combination of both, every now and again. I love the silence. I've learned how to reflect. And I love that too. Why can't we have it all?
Well, see that, I think that's where, let's hit the pause button, because it sounds like we're going in two different directions here. I want to reflect on this, and you want to, and I hear you wanting to fix it.
Fix it?
Yeah, let's do a combination. Let's do a blend together. You can do both. This is fixing language, and I'm wanting to do reflection language, which is analyze and process what we see at length. Okay, and so we can't do. I'm not sure that we can do both. So let's go to the panel. Are we going to try to fix something tonight? Or are we going to try to reflect on whether this article has merit? We need to know which direction to go in.
Dale, I hear you thinking.
Huh?
I hear Dale thinking. I just can't make out the words.
I find the conversation interesting. When this doesn't actually address what you just asked, but you have pointed a finger at these contemporary worship experiences that basically is an hour and a half, 2 hours of consistently moving. That's no different than a traditional worship service.
Very.
It's no different. It's no different at all.
Okay.
Because,
Talk about it, please.
because I have worshiped in a church in Atlanta that goes from 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock, and it's go all the way through. And just this last Sunday, I was in a traditional worship service, which I would classify as a very extroverted worship service, because there's no pause. It doesn't have to be Joel Osteen's glamour show to be extroverted. It can be a traditional church that you go to every Sunday that does exactly the same thing. It's just a different way of doing it.
Okay.
But I've also seen, as a pastor, and Patricia, I think I'm in the same canoe you're in, that you can do both. Because when you think about it, it's the ability to perceive who's worshiping and giving everyone the opportunity to encounter the living God. And that can be done through powerful movements, and it can be done through silence. And I learned a long time ago that one of the greatest fears in any traditional church is silence. When you pause for 5 seconds, it seems like 5 minutes. And the pastor I've seen gets very fidgety about making sure everything moves. That's in a traditional service. I think you can do both, and in any service where you give everyone, whether you're introverted or extroverted, the opportunity to encounter the living God.
Does this mean that the guy who wrote the article is maybe wrong about this, that it's not about extroversion and introversion, because it may be about finding a way to blend worship in such a way that it has some silence but and reflection, but also doesn't drag and isn't, quote unquote boring.
Because don't you have to consider, just like when I read scripture, I just don't read a pericope and go, that's on to look at. I look at before and after to see what the whole story is. And perhaps he's looking at, from his experience, what he perceives is an extrovert or an introvert experience from his own personal perspective, which we all do.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, when I think about that article, I don't think about a pastor or a congregation aiming toward one group of people in the church. I believe that they're trying to create a worship for everybody to accommodate, because you're going to have both in your church. You're going to have three. You're going to have the ambi as well. You're going to have the introvert, you're going to have the extrovert, and you have those in between who was on the line. So I think, I mean, I appreciate what the way he targeted it, and his wanting to analyze that or to write from where he sat, and it gives us something to think about. But I don't think most churches, when they are creating a worship or founding a church, they think about who the extroverts, who the introverts. It's just we're going to plan.
He suggested maybe they should. He's suggesting that it might be the introverts that save the church from itself.
How are they going to save the church
Analysis and
from
targeting.
themselves?
By the extroverts trusting them and creating worship that is meaningful to them, rather than all of this well-timed hullabaloo that we are so good at now. It was in the article. I mean, that was the point of the article, was that, these people who lie, by the way, it's not people, introverts aren't people who shy. I'm an introvert. I'm not shy. I'm not afraid to talk to anybody. The question about introvert extrovert is, what do social occasions do to your energy? That's the basic question for introvert extrovert. And there's he demonstrated, and I've seen this demonstrated before, that there's sort of a continuum, but you lean one way or the other. Either social occasions tend to drain you and you need a period of recovery afterward, or they energize you and you're ready to rush on and do new things with new boldness. So you go to parties and you get more and more energy, and introverts go to parties and you kind of talk with a few people in the corner that you can tolerate, and then you leave early because it's draining you.
But that's true for everywhere. If they go to work or they go to a party or the food store or something,
You're arguing with me. You said, but I mean, I'm trying to describe the definition. It's not something you argue about, I don't think.
No, what I'm saying is, you made the point that the people who come to church, they go to a corner and then they're waiting to leave because they're drained by the end of the service.
Could be.
But I'm saying, wouldn't that happen not just in the church, but other places as well?
Anywhere an extrovert can transport him or herself, yes. So what are you saying?
No, what I'm saying is, I don't think it's unique to the church.
I didn't say it was, and neither did he. The point is that some people, for all social occasions, church or not, they tend to be drained by it if they're and those are called introverts. They lose energy and they have to go and refuel by having some alone time, a nap, quiet time, doing their own thing. Whereas extroverts might go from a party to another party. They get revved up. They like social occasions. They don't want them to stop. They tend to be in the middle of the room, toward the middle of the room. I was thinking about Owl Rock, and after worship, I've been noticing that conversations tend to take place in the corners, except for one. There's always one around you in the middle. So they gather around. A few of them gather around the extrovert in the middle of the room, and then in the four corners of the room, the introverts are talking. And there are way more of them than there are of extroverts. And my question is, I'm not asking you for you fix it. I'm not asking for anybody to answer the question. It's rhetorical. Is this a coincidence that people who were seeking something more traditional in worship and a small loving congregation might have also, maybe subconsciously, been looking for a place where they're not so overwhelmed with things happening loudly and quickly that they can actually have a moment of quiet and peace and reflection?
I have been to church services that I took my earplugs because they were so loud. And I was so uncomfortable with the loudness.
Have you ever tried to put your fingers in your ears without people noticing that you're
Yeah,
putting your fingers in
I've
your
got all
ears?
sorts of methods for that.
Like, when that out of tune loud stuff hits me, there's part of my face that feels like that commercial where the speakers hit that guy and blow his clothes and everything backward and his face is like this. It comes at me like that.
Yeah. It's like, don't yell at me. You can speak quietly to me and I'll get the message. You don't have to scream it at me.
And you don't have to have your amplifier on 11.
Mm-mm.
Well, I would say that I don't, not you don't, because, the I is what we're describing here. And I enjoy music that vibrates my body and my soul, but I also enjoy music that's quiet and serene, because they both, allow me to encounter the moment with God. And I'm not sure if we're all completely either or extrovert or introverts. I would classify myself more as an introvert, even though I stood in the pulpit for 44 years preaching, but, I'm a very quiet person when I want to be. But I find in worship, I can encounter the experience, whether it's loud and vibrant or soft and just really cool. I think that's
Me too. Depending on the music, for me personally, I mean, when I listen to rock and roll, I want it to be loud because it was designed to be, right? I sort of like that. That's sort of the category of love and expertise, and I like it loud. I'm not sure I feel that way about hymns. I think of them as more joyful, yes, but more reflective. They more contemplative, more meditative. But not everybody feels that way.
But there's some really good contemporary Christian music. And I'm not really talking about that. I like some of that music quite a bit, some spiritual music. But I guess I'm reflecting more on the preaching when I say I put my earplugs in.
Oh, for
I
sure.
feel like somebody's yelling at me.
That's what you're doing in the choir every Sunday.
I'm up there, quit yelling at me.
You can just put your earbuds in now. Maybe they can't see them.
I know they might think I'm just, I don't know. Anyway, I've got little flesh colored ones that stick in and I put my hair over it.
Put your hair over it. And Gene will never know.
But I'm with Dale. I like some of the, upbeat contemporary Christian music as well.
I don't.
Not for the whole service, just once in a while.
Well, I want to confess to you, Kathy, I really don't like hymns or contemporary music. There's not much in the church in the way of music that fits my personal taste.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned long ago as a child to sacrifice that, but it's never going to suit my taste. My ears are weird. And when things are bothering my ears, I just try to do things that are polite, like stick my fingers in them without them noticing.
Yep.
I tell you, one of the most embarrassing things I think that ever happened to my poor dad was that night Mike, we went to that little church where he was preaching a revival. And imagine the worst choir possible, and then triple it. And my mom, it was so bad, my poor mom, who is really socially sensitive, she got tickled. And of course we were tickled. And there we are sitting on the front row laughing, what's off in the middle of my dad's revival service. And he was standing up there just glaring at us. Do you recall this, Mike?
A little bit. Probably more than once.
But the thing is, he never did get upset with mom because he knew it was true, that it was impossible to sit there without laughing.
Right.
Okay, if I hadn't been up front, that's the worst thing I've ever heard. But what was going on in their hearts? It's something that I didn't ask at the time. What's happening in the room? What's going on with this church? I didn't know the context. All I knew is that that's the worst choir. That's the worst caterwauling I've ever heard. So, I mean, I don't know.
All I can say is that just God love them.
God love them.
And bless their hearts.
Bless their hearts.
I mean, if we had all the money in the world and could hire anybody to do music at Owl Rock that we wanted to, and we got together and had a meeting, I think it would be hard. I think it would be hard for us to decide as a group what to do. Because the people who are at Owl Rock they like traditional more than contemporary. They like contemplative more than energetic. They like traditional more than charismatic. They like singing from a hymn. God forbid we should waste time opening a book and using the numbers to find the page. That's just too much trouble. The extroverts are going to get bored. We can't use page numbers. They'll have to count. It takes too much time to count. And the books are heavy. They're just too heavy. You know, people aren't going to pick those books up. They're just too heavy. You know, what are we doing? Why is it
Forming.
Yeah.
Back to the article, I really think that if you're going to save the church, it's going to be the introverts. Because I think there's
It's going to be what?
Why so?
Because I think there's a foundation, a theological foundation that they can exhibit to the whole community. Instead of just a energy that's flowing, it's contemplative, but I also think it contains energy that flows, but not at the same pace.
Not at the same pace. So it might be, pace may be really important in this thing, because we talked about how in contemporary worship, there's an emphasis on keeping things moving so that there's not any lull, and you know, there's not any dead air, dead space, dead time, you know. And I know that someone said to me recently, who's a member at Owl Rock, that she likes the pace there. It just goes kind of nice and slow. We just move along. We take time to talk to one another. We take time to go through the prayer list and think about people individually. You know, I think that the most structured thing about Owl Rock is there, and maybe it's my fault, is that the worship service is supposed to end at 11 o'clock. And if it doesn't, I think there's anxiety in the room. I don't know if it's coming from me or them or both of us. But I think that's the most structured thing about Owl Rock, is we really do think of that hour mark as being law. And I'm not sure that's right or fair. But if we didn't stop on time, what happens is that worship services can forget to land. They just don't have a landing strip. They keep circling the airport for a couple hours, and you know, I wouldn't want that, and I don't think they want that.
Dr. George Morris, who taught evangelism,
I remember him.
He made a statement once, said that a sermon's like flying an airplane. The introduction is taking off, the body is the flight. He says few people learn how to land the plane. And that's true about what you're saying with worship. Sometimes we just don't know when to stop, you know, and it's a struggle.
Yeah, I've seen services where it just kept going until people were too exhausted to continue.
Yeah. I think what you said a minute ago, Bert, about you feel like there's a lull that you're trying to avoid. And if, you know, as long as you're thinking that way, I mean, you can start thinking that way unconsciously and making a never-ending service ultimately by doing that. But if you're avoiding a lull, then, you know, avoidance is something that's done because of fear of something.
Right.
Like fear of something impending.
So here's an example, Mike. Why did people start playing something musical during our moment of silence? Or why did people start playing something musical while the pastor is praying? Because it's just too close to silence. And every time he stops speaking or she stops speaking, there's a brief silence. So the music is sort of You know, and then there's these guys and gals who can play the piano so well by ear that they're listening to the prayer, and as the pastor kind of amps it up or changes the subject, the piano player will follow him and change the key and change the tempo, and you have an entire composition put together for that pastor's prayer, you know, extemporaneously in the moment. And I'm asking my question: why can't he just pray? Does God listen better when there's an organ, a Hammond B? What is it? B3, B2,
B3,
B3?
but it's not for God. It's more about the people and setting the atmosphere for people to worship. Like the music brings in.
I'm questioning that.
It makes, when I hear certain music, I get in a certain mood for worship,
Okay.
or to pray, or to be jubilant. Music does that.
So how about mood setting? Is mood setting important during prayer or any other part of the service?
For some people, it is. Others not. I think it is. But
Well, what do y'all think? I mean, is setting the mood by having, you know, adding music to the pastor's prayer? Or now, I tell you, there was one time I was really glad they added music to the pastor's prayer, because this is the way he prayed every Sunday. Oh Lord, we beseech thee, though we are worms and are not worthy to be called your children. And when you pray like that, yeah, I want a Hammond be playing something.
As I am.
No, you're singing too fast. Slow it down.
I don't think I've ever been to a communion service that they didn't have some kind of music.
Yeah, they play communion during the offering usually, and they play during communion usually, but some services add playing during the prayer.
Mhm.
And we had a young fellow come in and audition when we were looking for an accompanist. And I didn't give him any instructions, you know, I just gave him what the music was in advance. And when it came time for the pastoral prayer, he played during my prayer. And someone said to me after the service, he doesn't know what he's doing. He kept playing during your prayer. This person had actually never heard anyone do that before.
Mhm.
And it was alarming to this person.
Mhm.
How dare you play your little egotistical tune, interrupting the pastor when he's talking to God for us? And somebody else would say, you know, really, that music he played during the prayer, that was special, man. That set the mood, that set the tone. It was so important to me, you know. And I'm like, wow, how are we ever going to worship together if we're that different?
But that mood you're talking about is done by a pace. It changes the pace too.
With the music?
Yeah, the mood that you're talking about, you talk about setting the mood.
Yeah.
And music is a part of that, but that's also setting the pace of the worship service too.
So it's not just a response, it drives it as well. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe even takes over. You know, lots of the conflict in churches has been between the musicians and the pastor or staff. I'm just saying.
Mm-hmm.
Tensions between the way that the worship service is supposed to go, how the music minister envisions it, how the accompanist or band envisions it, how the church board envisions it, and how the congregation envisions it might be very different.
Well, as a retired United Methodist pastor, I was in control of worship. You're right. That's one thing that I had. It was mine. Worship was mine. Everything else could be dealt with, but it was mine. And the church knew that. But that wasn't me being a dictator. It was me just making sure that we dealt with worship in a way that was what I don't call it traditional or contemporary. The word I grew into using was relevant worship. And that
I love that word, relevant, but also reverent. I think
I
would
agree.
be important to me. In addition, so you know, I'm afraid this is devolving into some, I don't want it to, and maybe it's not, but I'm worried that it's devolving into we have to choose between worship styles based on personality differences. I don't want to have that meeting.
Mhm.
What I'm hearing though is a conversation that might be helpful, because just like that person did not know that some churches have music during the pastor's prayer and was offended and disturbed that anyone would do something so offensive. Maybe we really don't know what the people around us expect. Maybe we don't realize how different we are. But one thing and that's why I kept kind of harking back to churches that I've served and Owl Rock as well, thinking about what's the place of extroversion and introversion in that congregation. How comfortable are we with pregnant pauses? As it says in a movie somewhere, you know that you have such a special relationship when you're comfortable with silence with one another.
Yeah.
And yet that never happens in a lot of worship services because silence is the enemy.
And I think there's a reason for that, Bert. Like, for a lot of people, there's just so many impinging thoughts, just on a daily basis. I mean, I've had many people tell me that the thoughts are just rushing in when there's a pause, and so maybe a little tune happening in the background for them could kind of help calm that and slow it down a little bit so that they can kind of take in more what's happening presently.
Well, I love that, Mike. And those of you who have been pastors, I don't know if you feel this way or not, but when they play that little thing when they have the offertory or the anthem right before I preach, I'm really grateful, because that's an opportunity for me to kind of turn off the monkey brain and just and center, and stop planning so much, and remind myself, Bert, God has given you the ability to get up there and to be yourself, and that's more important than you getting the first 3 words intoned just right. Don't plan anything. Get up there and be you, and forget all this, anxious impulse stuff, and settle in. And I always appreciate it when Jean plays something, when Patricia sings, or whatever happens right before I get up. You understand? That's really helpful to me. I don't know if that's because I'm an introvert or not, but it's really helpful to me.
And I think that's what happens too to a lot of people who come to worship. Some people need to have praise and worship. Some people need to have something to settle their brain or their minds, or to get them into tune with God, so to speak. People need different things. People go to churches for what they need and because of what they get. People come to Owl Rock a lot, I think, because of the kind of worship is there. People will go around the corner to Rocky Head because of the kind of worship. Some people go to church only for the choir, or for a combination of the choir and the preacher, or different things. You'll be surprised to know what people go to worship for. I just don't know if it has to do with introvert and extrovert. It might, and there are times when I want to worship. I want to lift my hands and I want to praise. And I walk away without that. And there are times when I really want that.
It makes me feel bad, Patricia, because I love what you do with your choir at your church. It's not Owl Rock, but when I go down there, I really love what y'all do, and I know how bad you must miss that, and Owl Rock can't fix it, and that's why this question is so important. Is that if it's that important to you, it might be important enough to some people that they would leave an Owl Rock to go to a Mount Zion where they have 100 people in the choir, and they have a full band, and they worship for 3 hours.
Yeah.
That's what and I think that terrifies some of the introverts, especially the older generation, because all of that looks like showing out fake, impossible cacophony to tolerate.
I hear you.
And we're supposed to worship together. And people talk about, well, we could go to Owl Rock, or we could go someplace where there's more worship and praise. Well, define worship and praise. Are you saying we don't worship and praise as much at Owl Rock, or are those style words today? I think we're worshiping at Owl Rock, just like we're worshiping in Nassau, but we are using different forms. Maybe there are different. The elements of worship can be wildly different depending on where you are in the world. And I'm curious. I'm very curious about this question, because I tried to think of the extroverts at Owl Rock just as an exercise, just as a mental exercise. I went through everybody, and I'm guessing she could be the only extrovert in the room. And that may be, and is that related to Owl Rock's worship style?
Could be.
Because those people don't like loud and fast. They want contemplative. They want to read. They want to think and reflect. And they don't want to be overwhelmed by the speed of the service or the volume of the service.
But it doesn't necessarily mean loud and fast. I can go to.
I'm just saying, I think that's what they're afraid of.
I hear you.
They're afraid of that's what it means.
I hear you.
And I'm not afraid of it being loud and fast. I can make that adjustment. I like some things about that. The thing is that it's not all up to me. It's not all about me. And you got worship going on at Owl Rock. It's about them. And you got worship going on at Lafayette. It's about them. And we may not be conscious about what we do in the worship committee or what pastors do when they make worship decisions. And they've got certain suppositions in their mind about what the congregation needs and what's best for them. But are they accurate?
Even as a pastor for years, I still do ask the question, why do we worship the way we worship? Why do I go to a church to a new appointment, and the style of worship is the way it's been for 30 years? Go to another church and the style of worship is the same way in the previous 30 years. And I'm not sure we ever asked the question, why are we worshiping the way we worship? What's going on here?
That's really the question underlying even the extrovert introvert question tonight is, why do we worship the way that we do? And is that worship that we're designed for everybody, or just the introverts and the extroverts, or just the charismatics and the traditionals? How do you design worship and that meets people's needs? And I don't have an answer. I'm just saying, I've noticed something new here. It's like when someone discovers the Enneagram and they realize that they've got a room full of children with lots of different temperaments, and they learn differently. So how do you develop a lesson plan, Mike, Gary, for a class that may be wildly different in their learning styles?
Yeah.
Easy to do.
That's right. It's not easy to do.
So how do you preach a sermon that reaches everybody, meets everybody's needs in the room? How do you organize worship in such a way that it meets everybody's needs in the room? How do you organize a classroom lecture or classroom experience such that everybody learns equally well? Well, it may be impossible.
Yeah.
I have learned to compromise on music to the point that I just don't talk about it. I sing hymns. If we go to her worship service, I sing gospel and do both the best that I can. It's not a question anymore of whether I prefer it or I like it. It's a question of everybody else does this. I want to participate, and I want it to come from genuinely who I am and what I believe. So I'll find a way to do it. Now, maybe I'm not standing in the aisle and dancing while I'm singing, but I might be singing a little different than you're used to me singing. If you heard me singing in Nassau at her church, I make the adjustments that I need to make. And that's the other thing. Jesus talked about this. He said, put other people first. Consider their needs.
Yep.
make adjustments for people's weaknesses and preferences.
I've heard you preach different, Bert, when you've gone to a church that was more lively and who says amen to the
That's right.
preacher.
Yeah.
I've heard you preach differently. Like you get a little bit more vibrant, more charismatic. I mean, you still use
I
that.
follow what's the energy in the room and the expectations of the listeners. It's really one of the best things to do as a pastor is to try to understand how a church listens. And each church has kind of a listening style. And so I try to find that as fast as I can. And if I'm preaching in a situation like Rocky Head, where 95% of the people in the room are African American, and they're all shouting hallelujah and amen at what I'm saying, I get a little revved up. I mean, you can understand that, right? I'm not being phony. I'm just following their energy.
You're exactly right. I mean, I've pastored 2 African American churches full time. I've preached in other African American churches, which I dearly love that experience. It's where you are at the time. Just like years ago, I had a 4-point circuit, 4 churches. I preached in 4 churches every Sunday.
Wow.
Yeah. But they were 4 different churches, which meant when I walked into each new pulpit, it was different. You adapt. And I think this article really is talking about adapting, seeing who's there and adapting to be able to allow everyone to be involved and encouraged to be a part of what's going on.
I think so. And that adaptation for this particular writer seemed to involve, okay, first of all, just because you're an extrovert and you're all fired up for Jesus doesn't mean that he loves you more than me. It also doesn't mean there's anything wrong with me. I was made an introvert by God. So quit trying to make me into you. And let's have a conversation about what we can do in worship that meets our needs than the congregation's needs.
Yeah, Bert, there's a quote in here that fits exactly what you just talked about, I thought poignantly. It says, if we're not careful, we can paint the picture that an authentic Jesus follower is relentlessly optimistic, tirelessly energetic, emotionally expressive, and magnetically sociable. In other words, pure nightmare fuel for introverts.
Pure nightmare fuel. And he wasn't being exaggerating.
No.
I think that introverts tend to be more sensitive to for brain chemistry wise. I think it's been shown that they're more sensitive to pace and volume and sound and light and things like that. So flashing lights, fast moving services at an unbearable volume. That's truly like going to hell.
So it's kind of like Jesus and Mary and Martha.
In that,
well, one sat at his feet and listened to him talk while the other was busy.
Yeah, that's nice.
Sure.
That's nice. True. Yeah.
Sheila, what do you think about all this? We haven't heard your voice tonight.
I've kind of been a little quiet because I got a lot of noise in the background, but
Go figure.
That's ironic.
but as far as the music in church and all that, I enjoy the music. I've been brought up the traditional way. And it kind of, in a way, got old for me. I love the feel of a book in my hand. I really do. But I needed that little extra. I needed to, as Pastor Dale said, I needed to have that noise in my soul. And it would bring things up where I was really praising God. Where traditional, I was going through the motions. I was saying what I was supposed to say. And by the end, it meant nothing to me. I know that's a shame, but it didn't mean anything. I've been to contemporary churches here. And when I come out, I have that energy that I need for the rest of the day, that I know I have talked with God and I know he has talked with me, and I can walk out and say, I know who I am. Where the other churches, I just couldn't do it. And I was a phony in those churches. I might as well admit it. I really was a phony. I tried to be like them, very temporary. And that wasn't me. It just wasn't me. I got to feel God. It took me a long time to get there. And now that I'm there, I need to feel him. I need to have that song in my head, whether it's a jazz song or whether it's just a slow song. I got to have it.
Sheila, do you think that it's possible for us to overcome our prejudices about different styles of worship emotionally? Because I think that there is a default setting among those who do not like contemporary. Their default setting is that contemporary music is self-centered, show out fake narcissism. Now, they may not say that out loud to you to be polite, but that's the way they feel about jumping up and down in church, is that you're drawing attention to yourself, you're pretending you're trying to get attention. You're just an immature narcissist who needs to show off. And we didn't come here to watch you.
Right.
We're tired of you running, jumping around in the sanctuary and distracting us.
And that's something I don't do. I mean, as far as it, but the song.
So my question is that that prejudice against contemporary worship, there's one on the other side too, which is that traditional worship is irrelevant, to use Dale's word. It's irrelevant and it is boring and I get nothing out of it and I can't wait to leave. And people who go to traditional worship are going through the motions. It's just habit. They're doing it because they're supposed to. It has no value, meaning, or purpose. It's just doing what you're supposed to do. Now, they may not say that out loud to their contemporary worship lovers. They might, but they're thinking it. And I've kind of been in both camps from time to time. So I'm sure that's what they're thinking. How can we help people get over the fact that, hey, these people are not narcissists. They're having an experience, and quit watching them and keep your eyes on your own plate, please. And stop judging what they do in worship. How can we get them to do that? And on the other hand, how can we get the people who love the contemporary not to look at the people who love the traditional and say, these people are just deadly, just boring, deadly, and I don't want to be around them anymore.
And it's not that I would never go to a temporary service again. It's not maybe I put it that way, but as long as I can hear about God, I really don't care. It's just, I want to feel like me in a church and not like somebody else.
Yeah.
So when I was in youth there in Spring City, those kids taught me a lot.
Yeah.
As far as praising God, they really did.
Okay.
And they didn't care who was watching. They just didn't care. It was their way of worshiping God, and they were happy about it. And when I went to this Methodist church here, I kind of heard them in the background every time I went. And finally, I just couldn't do it anymore. I can't go in there with a false face, and shake hands and hug somebody that I really don't even know. And, they say, oh, we've missed you in church or whatever. Maybe they did. I don't know, but I just felt odd. I felt out of place.
Yeah.
And you like what you like. I think it's okay to have preferences. It's like, you date somebody, you're attracted to certain kind of people, and you're not attracted. It don't mean that you hate them. It doesn't mean that. It means that this is my preference here. And so I think the same thing with worship. People, I love exuberant worship. I love charismatic worship. I love to raise my hands and I love to
Me
feel
too.
like I've been to church.
Me
That's
too.
that's who I am. And so I think that doesn't mean I hate the other kind of worship or
Right.
people who do that, but we just have preferences. And
Mhm.
yeah, I think it's okay to be wherever you are. Once you know that you're worshiping God and you feel like you're doing all that you can to worship in spirit and truth
Yeah.
and in holiness. That's
That's the most important part, isn't it? To try to
Mhm,
find where you can worship the best.
mhm.
And it doesn't
Wow.
matter which way.
And
it goes.
and there's no perfect church, there's no perfect Christian, and everybody needs to compromise a little bit here, you know? And I think one of the reasons that churches continue to last is that they find ways, to adapt
Mhm.
to new situations and to compromise when we need to. Still, there is that need to come together and worship, and I think that Patricia may feel like she's worshiping when she's in a situation where the choir is really getting after it and the praise band is really getting after it, and somebody else may feel like this is the last place on earth I want to be right now. One is feeling God, and the other one is feeling like someone please call 911.
Mhm.
And it's over the same experience, and I'm straining here to comprehend how we do it. I mean, I realize people complain about how different churches are, but we almost have to be, considering how different Christians are. They're really different in their preferences and needs.
And we're made that way.
Yeah.
And we need different things. None
Yeah.
of us need the same thing.
One of
I
the
mean,
advantages of
how
traditional
boring it
worship.
would be if we were all alike.
Yeah.
Wow,
It would
that
be so
really-
boring.
It
Yeah.
would. I'm glad who I am.
You take the word. You took the
I
word
am
out of my
too,
mouth.
Sheila.
I'm glad who you are, Sheila.
I heard. Right?
Well, Bert, I think
Amen.
you,
Glory. Hallelujah.
okay, now, here we go. Speak to it, come on, say it.
Notice
Amen.
how the introverts are patiently waiting for the praise activity to cease so they can go back to having a conversation.
Well, Bert, I think you actually said something that's extremely relevant to me anyway. Compromise.
Mhm.
I don't think there's a either or here. There's a both and.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And if we're willing to see each other and compromise and not say I'm right, you're wrong, or you're right, I'm wrong, but to say that we journey together. We may not completely agree on everything, but the focus is on worship and however we do that. And that's a compromise sometimes.
Yeah.
As long as you walk out of there and you remember who you worshiped.
That helps.
I mean,
Yeah.
and when I walk out of church, I know who I worshiped, you know. And so it doesn't matter. You can stand out in your backyard and you can sing to God and you can raise your hands and hallelujah, but you got to know who you're talking to.
It would be interesting to try to figure out how to get the proper sample sizes, but I would love to do a study. Here's an introverted rationalist talking here. I would love to figure out how to do a study to see if there is a relationship between worship style needs and introversion versus extroversion and personality. That was one of the first big things that hit me when I was reading this was, oh my God, where are the introverts going to church if they aren't going with him? And why do they all feel inferior? And how come we're not watching and listening to them? How come we're not picking them to lead? And how come they're not leaders in worship more? And it's like you said, your sister, she's leads in worship. She's an introvert. But at the same time, all of us aren't introverts learn how to turn it on for a minute in a social situation and do what's necessary. Introversion is not about being awkward or shy, you know. She can turn it on when she wants to. Some of the funniest and most entertaining people like Robin Williams in the world are introverts. Johnny Carson is a major introvert, but he was the most popular figure on TV for 30 years.
Yeah.
on TV.
Mhm.
Millions
That's a
of
good
people in
point,
his
Bert.
name. Huh?
That's a good point, because we were talking about compromise, and in order to get to a compromise, I mean, both sides need to express what's going on, and the one that's, the extroverts are, Patricia, are, it's most easily coming forth. It's not as much with introverts, and they're often are listening a lot,
Yeah.
but not getting everything expressed that may need to be.
Well, that being the case, maybe if I said it as crassly as I possibly could, I think the tension I've seen in the Methodist churches in my life over the years has been between those who are for traditional music and worship and those who are not. And that gap is driven by one thing and one thing only. The people who like the contemporary music, they look at that traditional worship, they go to that traditional worship, and what do they feel? They feel like Jesus ain't there.
Yeah.
Then it's the other way around too.
Yeah.
People in traditional music look at and attend contemporary music and worship and preaching and charismatic and all of that, and they look at it, and what do they feel? Jesus is not there.
Yeah.
Now, that's as crass as I can put it, but that's the way those groups felt, and they weren't budging.
Yeah.
So what do? We create a contemporary worship service in another building at 8:30.
Mhm.
Let the freaks go over there.
Yeah.
That's what we did to them.
Mhm.
And really, there are people, and I'm sure there's still in Owl Rock, who just don't want to hear loud drums and guitars in the sanctuary. And there are people in there who wish we had loud drums and guitars in the sanctuary occasionally.
Mhm.
And I'm one of them. But I'm not going to push it, because that's not what I do. It's not my job to railroad worship styles down Owl Rock's throat. I'm trying to listen to what they want. And I think right now the majority is pretty happy with more traditional, but warm and loving and informal. It has its formal side, but it also has its informal side. We're talkative, we're chatty. We don't make a big deal about it being high church, but at the same time, you're not likely to hear an Andre Crouch special at Owl Rock unless Patricia does it.
I'm the culprit.
You're not the culprit. The problem, you're the one who was raised in a very different style than most of the people in that room.
Yeah, I understand. I get it.
Most of the people at Owl Rock have told me that they were looking for traditional worship because that's what they were used to.
Mhm.
And you can't say that.
Yeah.
You weren't looking for it. You found it, but you weren't looking for it.
Yeah, but a lot of people are socialized into settings, like Johnny Carson and those, and people who they're socialized in a certain setting. It might not be the norm for them, but I can get with this and I can do it. I have done it and enjoy it too. But then there are times when I need something else. And I think that's how we vacillate as human beings. We have different needs at different times.
So my hope is that you feel heard, and I hope that y'all feel heard, because part of this conversation is really hard, because in our guts, whether it's rational or not, there is that tendency to think, well, I don't feel Jesus-y here, and I do feel Jesus-y there. And that feeling drives our decision making about where we go and what we do. And I hope that I wish there were a way for people on both sides not to turn it into something so ridiculous as Jesus is in one and not the other. But I think they feel that way. I think they really feel that way. And I myself have felt that way, and I repent of it. But hey, y'all, it's been a great conversation. I'm afraid we lost Gino because we went too long. Are you still out there, Gino?
If anyone on Facebook
He left a message and
He
said his
left a message.
Okay.
internet was
Yeah.
unstable.
Very
Oh, is he freezing
unstable.
up?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that, Gino. Thank you for
And
being
Dale
here.
and Dale left us a message too.
What is your message, Dale?
It's a YouTube link.
YouTube.
It's a really good song.
Oh,
It's Real. It's called Real by Rusty Stewart. for those of you who can't see the Facebook link, the song is called Real, and it's by Rusty Stewart. And he
No, I think that is
No?
the real. No,
No?
it's-
That's not-
Oh, that's not on the feed. Where is that you wrote that? Dale?
Chat here.
Oh, the chat here.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Abba.
I
Yeah.
misunderstood.
mhm.
Oh, I see there are chats. Yes. Okay.
But
Okay,
I
there's
think-
the link. I don't know what that song is. What is this? What's the link, Dale?
It's the link is to a praise and worship song.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
It's on YouTube. So
Is it one you like?
No, I love.
You
I
love?
am to worship.
Okay.
Ruby has been
Patricia.
watching tonight.
Patricia, I think Patricia would like this one too.
Oh, what's it called?
Oh,
To
Okay.
follow up what you just said, Bert, I think connecting is the key to worshiping. And it doesn't matter if it's traditional or contemporary, because I do both and enjoy both tremendously. And, certain people look for certain things. We received members in the church a few years ago who came to our church only because we had a choir. That's what they were looking for in worship. And they
Mhm.
couldn't find it anywhere else. So it's what we connect with. It's what I say is relevant worship. It doesn't have to be called contemporary or traditional. If it's relevant where people connect, then it's real.
Yeah.
Mhm.
yeah, and we're left with the mystery and the challenge of worshiping with brothers and sisters in Christ who intensely disagree with us about what is worship and what makes them feel worshipful. That doesn't make other people evil or wrong, but let's go back to compromise too. I mean, everybody realized that we're not playing Bert's favorite music every Sunday. Far from it. You would hate it. So I compromise. I don't force my music taste on anybody. I don't even post music videos anymore. Nobody likes my music. It hurt my feelings for a while, but now I realize I just have weird ears. So I have to be the one to accommodate. I have to be the one not to freak out and push and judge. I have to be the one that says that most people are liking these hymns or most people are liking these contemporary songs, and I'm gonna join them. I'm gonna sing along. I'm gonna get the best out of it I can with the best attitude that I can. And I know that Joel Osteen would be proud of my putting on a positive attitude. That was my sarcasm bubble. It popped up right here
Popped up.
next to my head. That was my sarcasm bubble.
Gary Larson.
It said sarcasm and it had a little arrow pointing right at my mouth. No, thanks for coming tonight. We've gone way over, but I've appreciated the conversation. I feel unfinished about it, but maybe that's a good thing. Maybe we should finish some of these studies.
yeah, we're recognizing it's not
Recognizing
simple.
what's happening, maybe getting a better perspective or a more,
Yeah, it's
You know,
complex.
yeah, I mean, it's like one of my favorite herpers. He says, he gets up on these big logs and he walks along the tops of these fallen trees, and somebody asked him, why do you keep doing that? I mean, there aren't any snakes up there. There aren't any turtles on that log. He said, I get perspective up here.
Mhm.
He can see the forest better 3 feet off the ground than he can from the ground. So if we elevated and did a little drone shot tonight on worship, contemporary or otherwise, maybe that's what we needed to do.
Yeah.
All right.
Glad y'all came. Love every one of you.
Love you too.
You
Glad
know,
to see you back.
And who was watching on
I thought I saw something from Ruby.
Ruby on Facebook? Okay. And I don't know who else. I can't tell, but I sure am glad that you all were here. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. And we
Would
will
y'all
not
keep
be,
would y'all keep me in prayer? I have to go see the heart doctor this
Yeah.
week.
yes,
Please.
Okay,
Yes, absolutely.
sure.
Thank you.
we
And
will.
please keep
Decide
my
what we're
sister,
gonna do.
And her
Sorry.
sister,
please keep
sister's
my
very ill.
sister Debbie in prayer as well.
And to give that
Yes.
said, that today I actually feel the best I have in 2 months.
Oh,
Oh,
praise
wow.
I don't know if it shows or not, but I feel pretty good today.
Good.
Yeah, you do seem better.
Got more energy. I don't feel achy and tired all day. I don't have the itching from, or the burning from the shingles. I've lost that. I can smell a little bit. I went on a walk yesterday, so
Yay.
maybe this
Wow.
long COVID is on its way out. I was about to lose my mind. Okay.
Yeah.
And prayers for, all the people on our prayer list and everybody who's listening right now. We thank you very much for being here with us, and we hope you'll come back next time. We're continuing our studies on Wednesday night for the next 2 Wednesdays, but Jean has discontinued the morning Wednesday study for a couple of weeks. So next Wednesday and the following, we will not have Wednesday morning Bible study on Jean Martino's page. They will resume whatever after Labor Day or whatever it is. I don't know. Okay.
Okay.
All
But
right.
we are on the panel. Thank you all. I'll be moving this on to YouTube tonight. Thanks.
Okay.
Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Take care,
Bye-bye.
everybody. God bless.
Dale, I'll go back and listen to the song, okay?
We're going to
Yeah.
listen to the song, Dale.
Good
Thank
job.
you.
I'm going to finish listening.
That's a good
All
thing.
right. Bye-bye.
Bye.